Once upon a time there was a little boy. He wasn't much to write home about, he didn't run the fastest, and he didn't get the best grades, but there was one thing he could do. He knew movies. He knew movies crazy good. Name a movie, he'd seen it. Have a trivia question, he'd answer it. He was the movie guy. Sure, it wasn't much of a talent, but it was something. It was his. But then one day there came a horrible decade called the 90s, and in the 6th year of this horrible decade, something happened that would change this boy's life forever. Intermittently worthwhile filmmaker Wes Craven and hack screenwriter Kevin Williamson collaborated on a generic deconstruction of cheesy slasher movies, built around the premise that if you had Jamie Kennedy make tired postmodern reference to the genre of movie they were in, people would mistake you for an insightful satirist. They called the movie Scream, and it was a big hit, and thanks to it, suddenly every jackass with a VCR learned how to talk about cliches and genre formula and other stuff that only movie geeks used to care about. And that little boy from earlier, well, for many years after that, he could no longer use or even admit to possessing what used to be his special skill, without having to hear the cringe-inducing response, "Dude, kid, you sound just like that guy what was in Scream, yo!" But hey, it's not like I've got an axe to grind or anything. I have always despised the Scream movies, and not just because they ruined a big chunk of my adolescence by reducing my meticulously maintained movie geekery into just another douchebag party trick. Ooh, you can tell who'll die first in a Jason movie? Gee, wow, here's a cookie. No, it's because they're the worst kind of lazy, too-hip-for-the-room, trendy, ironic crap that poisoned and has been poisoning the American horror genre for nearly 2 decades now. Yes, there are a few good moments or interesting performances scattered throughout each one, but that's not enough to excuse the baffling popularity of what was essentially Lady in the Water version 1.0. For the last 11 years at least, I've been able to take comfort in the fact that almost everyone who was guilty of Scream had a hard time replicating that success. Wes Craven has made exactly one great movie in the past 23 years, Williamson hasn't been part of a damn thing worth mentioning since his miserable Dawson's Creek wrapped, and all those hot young actors who were supposed to be the big-time movie stars afterwards? Yeah, not so much. So now, over a decade after Scream 3 supposedly put an end to this crap, all the survivors are back for a big honkin' paycheck called Scream 4. No, I'm sorry, Scriforum. And surprise, surprise, it sucks harder than a Dyson vacuum hooked up to a V8 Hemi. The premise of Scriforum is that Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott, the main surviving victim of the original trilogy, is back in her hometown of Woodsboro while on a tour to promote her Oprah-style self-help book about the ordeal. Ooh, that's some bitingly relevant social commentary that Rob Zombie totally kind of already covered in Halloween 2, like 3 years ago. You stay classy, Scriforum. Anyway, as soon as Sidney turns up, someone wearing the old Ghostface costume starts in on the old phone call trivia stabby stab routine, and in the grand tradition of poorly constructed whodunits, everyone has both a vague motive for homicide and a seemingly solid alibi. So Sidney and fellow veterans Dewey and Gale have to reunite to crack the case. Since the original Scream was about making tired, obvious reference to horror tropes, Scream 2 was about making tired, obvious reference to sequel tropes, and Scream 3 was about 116 minutes too long, Scriforum is about the current trend of horror franchises being remade and or rebooted. The gimmick is that the new Ghostface is obsessed with one-upping the original murders, and that the killings begin to revolve around Sidney's teenage cousin and her circle of friends who roughly encompass new model versions of the victim pool from the first movie. In theory, this is sort of a clever idea, but in practice, it's undone by that own cleverness. That's always been the problem with these movies. It's really hard to be self-aware about the moviness of your movie and still be able to get an audience to give a damn about the suspense or fates of the characters. Oh, there are some movies that can make that angle work, but unfortunately neither Craven, at least most of the time, nor Williamson, ever, are up to the task. It's impossible to care about this next generation of characters because they're clearly just setups for a punchline, as evidenced by the older characters who were just setups to a punchline that was already old 15 years ago. Even worse, Scriforum is aware of this potential criticism and actually opens by trying to be glibly self-aware about its own glib self-awareness, creating a kind of stable temporal loop of metatextual suck. It also doesn't help that, like the original trilogy, Scriforum is so proud of its weak meta-humor that it doesn't even feel the need to be creative about anything else. Ghostface remains the single most boring movie slasher outside of Williamson's other crappy franchise, and instead of interesting suspense sequences or even creative kills, we get one boring stabbing after another, intersped by endless scenes of people scrambling up staircases. There's one interesting scene involving a crime scene that only stands to highlight how dull the rest of the film is, and its one noteworthy kill is basically stolen from Dr. Giggles. But I would be remiss in not mentioning that there is at least 1 minute-and-a-half stretch of Scriphorum that shows some real honest-to-goodness chops. A literal how-to guide for combining insightful, trope-savvy genre parody with an authentic understanding of core horror filmmaking principles. Unfortunately for the filmmakers, it's because 2 of their characters are watching Shaun of the Dead.
Okay, Scream 4. This is one of the infamous ones of the older reviews. It's not infamous for the movie. It's the movie, I'm sure, has its fans. It's a Scream movie after all, but the review, this is one of the ones that I still hear a bunch of shit about to this day, because a lot of people took that opening bit way too seriously. Well, you know, I really thought that, like, the storyteller voice and, you know, the once upon a time there was a boy thing, I really thought the sarcasm came through in that a little bit more, or the sarcastic self-deprecation, rather. Yeah, I thought that carried off more. For the record, no, I have not spent that much time or energy bemoaning the fact of, or even really that there was a fact of, feeling bad about being compared to a character from Scream when I was in high school. Was it irritating? Yeah, but it's not like a thing that has defined my life. That is a bit of self-parody, self-acknowledgement. Yeah, you know, the fact that people did not let this go, and that I've still had to, like, hear about this as a criticism of the work going forward. Of, you know, I don't take this guy seriously because he's still hung up about people comparing him to Scream, is honestly something that I am more, quote, hung up about than I am about Scream. Because that's just sort of irritating. That's more irritating because it's coming from other grown adults now than hearing some shit from your peers in high school. I mean, there's plenty of stuff from grade school and high school that I'm not over. Believe me, I am plenty screwed up, but not by that. As for the movie, for all the build-up of all of the Scream movies, Scream 4 is one of the ones that I do not hear people bring up, or that they breeze right by. It really feels like the series basically skips from Scream 2 to Scream 2022, aka Scream 5, or just Scream the reboot. At this point, the noteworthy thing about this one is that it tries to be like an up-to-date, teched-up version of the original Scream, and it's all about, these are the new cameras, there's the internet now, they post things on this new invention called YouTube, and it's very... Like, I've never liked this series. I really don't like this one. I feel like I was very mean-spirited in this review, not because of the memory thing, but just, you know, like, shitting on about the cast, about how only Drew Barrymore has gone anywhere, which is an odd thing. It feels that dates it more than anything else, now that she's had that whole business happen during the strikes. But, you know, clearly, Neve Campbell had an actual career, bounce after this. I'm not a fan of this review for myriad reasons, but I think I was right about the movie not holding up. I do think that everything that it tries to do that's moderately interesting is done better in the Rob Zombie Halloweens. I agree with that, yeah. But, yeah, if for those of you who've been wanting to see the Bob review of Scream 4, there it is. I hope it lives up to your expectations.